The restaurant was warm, bright, and full of quiet music. But Daniel Carter felt strangely out of place the moment he stepped inside. The room was filled with people dressed in sharp suits and elegant dresses. It's the kind of people who spoke confidently and laughed loudly. He paused near the entrance for a second, adjusting the collar of his simple shirt. Across the room, he spotted Emily, waving at him with a bright smile. The nervous feeling in his chest softened a little when he saw her. Emily Parker always had that effect on him. Her energy could light up any room. She stood near a long dinner table surrounded by her coworkers, all chatting excitedly. She worked at a well-known marketing company. And tonight's dinner was meant to celebrate a successful project her team had just completed. Daniel had heard about the project for weeks. Emily had stayed up late many nights preparing presentations, checking numbers, and answering emails. He was proud of her, and when she invited him to the dinner, he wanted to be there for her. Still, Daniel knew this would not be his usual kind of evening. His world was quiet and creative. He worked as a freelance graphic designer from a small studio apartment, designing logos, posters, and illustrations for small businesses. His clients were cafe owners, artists, and local shops trying to build their brand. He enjoyed the freedom of his work and the calm rhythm of his days. Corporate dinners, loud groups, and formal conversations were not things he often experienced. Emily walked quickly toward him and hugged him warmly. "You made it," she said with a bright smile. "Of course," Daniel replied gently. "I wouldn't miss your big night." Her eyes sparkled with excitement. "Come, I want you to meet everyone." She guided him toward the long table where several of her coworkers were already seated. The table was decorated with candles and elegant glassware. Plates of food and drinks were slowly arriving as waiters moved around the room. "Everyone. This is Daniel," Emily announced. Several people greeted him politely. A few shook his hand. Daniel smiled and nodded, trying to remember their names as Emily introduced them one by one. There was Sarah from the design department, Lucas from finance, and a few others who spoke quickly and laughed often. At the far end of the table sat a man who seemed to naturally draw everyone's attention. He leaned back in his chair with the relaxed confidence of someone who is used to being admired. His name was Victor Reynolds. Victor was tall, sharply dressed, and had the kind of smile that looked friendly at first, but carried a hint of arrogance. Daniel noticed that many people at the table seemed eager to laugh at Victor's jokes, even before he finished them. Emily sat beside Daniel, squeezing his hand under the table for a moment. "Relax," she whispered. "They're nice people." Daniel nodded. He wanted the night to go smoothly for her. This dinner was important, and he didn't want to do anything that might make her uncomfortable. For the first part of the evening, the conversation stayed light. People talked about the project, shared funny stories from the office, and discussed future plans for the company. Daniel mostly listened. He didn't mind listening. Observing people had always been part of his creative mind. Victor, however, spoke more than anyone else. He told long stories about business meetings, successful deals, and clients who admired his ideas. His voice carried across the table easily, and people laughed whenever he paused. Daniel noticed something else too. Every time Emily mentioned something she had done on the project, Victor quickly added a comment of his own, often making it sound as if he had been the key person behind the success at one point. Emily excitedly explained how she had redesigned a presentation that helped the team win an important client. Before she could finish, Victor leaned forward with a playful grin. "Well, that presentation worked because the client already trusted my strategy," he said. Some people laughed politely. Emily smiled, though the smile looked slightly forced. Daniel quietly noticed the moment, but said nothing. He knew work relationships could be complicated. As dinner continued, the waiter placed plates of food in front of everyone. The smell of fresh pasta and warm bread filled the air. The atmosphere seemed relaxed, but Daniel still felt like a visitor in someone else's world. Victor suddenly turned his attention toward him. "So, Daniel," he said, resting his elbow on the table, "Emily tells us you're a freelancer." Daniel nodded calmly. "Yes, I design branding and illustrations." Victor tilted his head with curiosity that looked almost theatrical. Interesting. Several people at the table looked toward Daniel now, waiting to hear more. What kind of companies do you work with? Victor asked. Mostly small businesses, Daniel replied. Local shops, artists, startups. Victor's smile widened. Ah, he said slowly. So you're one of those creative types. The way he said it made the word sound slightly mocking. Daniel simply nodded. Victor picked up his drink and took a slow sip before speaking again. Freelancer, huh? That's another way to say unemployed with hobbies. A few people at the table laughed softly. Daniel felt a brief wave of embarrassment rise inside him. It wasn't the first time someone had made that joke about freelance work. But hearing it in a room full of strangers felt different. Emily shifted slightly in her chair. Beside him, Victor continued casually, as if he had just made a harmless comment. Don't get me wrong, he added. Creative freedom sounds nice. More quiet laughter followed. Daniel kept his expression calm. Years of working independently had taught him patience. Victor leaned forward again, clearly enjoying the attention he was receiving. So, tell me, he said. Do you work from home all day? Yes, Daniel replied simply. Victor chuckled. Must be comfortable. A few coworkers smiled again. Do you at least get dressed? Victor continued jokingly. Or do you design logos in your pajamas while Emily goes to work and pays the bills? This time the laughter was louder. Daniel looked down briefly at the candlelight reflecting on the table. The sound of laughter echoed in his ears. But he focused on breathing slowly. He glanced at Emily. She looked embarrassed and unsure. Her eyes met his for a moment before she looked away. She clearly didn't like the situation. But she also didn't interrupt. Victor seemed encouraged by the reaction of the table. Every group needs a dreamer, he added casually. Right, guys? Several people nodded, some still smiling. Daniel noticed that a few others looked slightly uncomfortable, though they didn't speak up. He rested his hands quietly on the table and listened for a moment as the conversation around him faded into background noise. The restaurant music, the clinking glasses, and the quiet movement of waiters filled the space. Inside his chest, emotions moved like slow waves. Embarrassment was there, yes, but also disappointment. Not just because of Victor's words, but because of the way everyone seemed willing to laugh so easily. He had come here to support Emily instead. He had become the evening's entertainment. Victor looked at him again. What kind of money do freelancers actually make? He asked with fake curiosity. I've always wondered. The question hung in the air. Daniel could feel the attention of the table returning to him. He noticed the calm expression on Victor's face, the small smirk waiting for another laugh. For a few seconds, Daniel said nothing. He wasn't angry. Anger would have been easier. What he felt instead was a quiet determination. He slowly lifted his head. I actually like working in my pajamas sometimes, he said. The table laughed again. Victor grinned, clearly pleased. But Daniel continued speaking, "'Cause it reminds me that freedom is more valuable than pretending to be successful." Up. The laughter faded slightly. Victor blinked once, surprised by the unexpected response. Daniel gently placed his fork on his plate and leaned back in his chair. I used to work in a corporate office, he added calmly. Several people looked at him with new curiosity. Long hours, Daniel continued. Big titles. Nice suits. Victor crossed his arms, watching him carefully now. But I realized something important. Daniel said that the table grew quieter. Victor tilted his head. And what's that? Daniel looked directly at him. That many people spend their whole lives trying to impress rooms full of people they don't even like. The sentence settled over the table like Sutton. Silence. Victor's smile slowly faded. A few coworkers shifted in their chairs. Emily looked at Daniel with surprise, as if seeing a different side of him. Daniel's voice had remained calm the entire time, but the atmosphere of the dinner had changed. and everyone at the table could feel it. The silence after Daniel's words felt heavier than any joke that had been told earlier that night. The sound of quiet music returned to the room, and the soft clinking of glasses from nearby tables suddenly seemed louder, for the first time since the dinner started. The long table full of Emily's coworkers had nothing to say. Victor was the first one to move. He leaned back in his chair and let out a small laugh, though it sounded forced. His eyes stayed fixed on Daniel, studying him as if trying to understand whether the calm man across from him had just challenged him or simply spoken an opinion. "Well," Victor said slowly, lifting his drink again, "that's a deep thought for a dinner conversation." A few people smiled nervously, unsure whether they should laugh again. Daniel didn't react to Victor's tone. His face remained calm, almost peaceful. He picked up his glass of water and took a small sip before setting it down again. "I'm not trying to sound deep," he said quietly. "Just honest." Victor raised an eyebrow. The table remained silent. Daniel looked around at the group. Most of them were now watching him with curiosity. Earlier they had seen him as the quiet boyfriend who didn't quite fit into their confident corporate circle. But something about the way he spoke now made them listen. "I'm not rich," Daniel continued calmly, "and I'm not the most impressive person here." Victor smirked slightly, but Daniel didn't notice or didn't care. "But I wake up every morning doing something I love," Daniel added. Sarah, the woman from the design department, leaned forward a little. She seemed genuinely interested now. Daniel continued speaking with the same steady tone. "I work with people who are building small dreams. A couple opening their first cafe. A painter trying to sell her first exhibition. A small bakery that wants to create its own brand." The words painted quiet images in the listeners' minds. "I help them design logos, menus, posters," Daniel said. "Sometimes it's simple work, but for them it means something big." Victor rolled his glass between his fingers, but didn't interrupt this time. Daniel's voice remained calm and thoughtful. "When one of them succeeds," he said, "when their shop finally opens or their business grows, they send me pictures." He paused for a moment, remembering pictures of the sign outside their door. Pictures of customers sitting at their tables. Sometimes they send a message saying, "Your design helped people notice us." Sarah smiled slightly at that. "And those moments feel good," Daniel said quietly. "Not because of money, but because you helped someone build something." "Rio." Victor suddenly let out a quiet scoff. "That's cute," he said. The word hung in the air. Daniel looked at him and smiled gently. "Yes," he said simply. "It is." Victor's eyebrows lowered slightly. He had expected irritation or defensiveness, but Daniel's calm agreement made it harder to continue the teasing. Victor leaned forward again. "But let's be honest," he said, glancing around the table as if seeking support from the others. "Emily works in a serious company. Big clients, big contracts." He gestured casually toward Daniel. "Do you really think you're on the same level?" The question was sharper than before. The table grew quiet again. Emily shifted in her seat. Her fingers tightened around her glass. She didn't like where the conversation was going, but the moment had already moved too far to easily stop. Daniel sat comfortably in his chair. He didn't look offended. In fact, he almost looked thoughtful. He turned his head toward Emily for a brief moment. When their eyes met, something unspoken passed between them. Then he looked back at Victor. "I don't compete with Emily," Daniel said quietly. Several people exchanged glances. Victor blinked once. "She's brilliant," Daniel continued. "Hardworking, passionate." Emily's expression changed slightly. She hadn't expected him to speak about her that way, especially after everything that had just happened. "And I admire her for that," Daniel added. Victor leaned back again, though his smirk slowly returned. "But relationships aren't competitions." Daniel continued. Now the table was fully listening. "In some relationships, people try to prove who earns more, who works harder, who has the better title," he said calmly. "But that kind of thinking usually leads to quiet resentment." Lucas from finance nodded slightly. Though he didn't speak, Daniel rested his hands loosely on the table. You know what makes someone impressive? He asked gently. Victor shrugged with a careless motion. What? He asked. Daniel paused for a moment. Kindness. The word was simple, but it carried weight. Respect, Daniel continued, and the ability to make the people around you feel valued. Victor's jaw tightened. Daniel's voice never became louder. In fact, it remained soft. Mocking someone at dinner, he added, especially someone you just met, doesn't really show confidence. Nobody laughed this time. The words were not aggressive, but they were clear. A few coworkers avoided Victor's eyes. The confident atmosphere Victor had created earlier was slowly fading. Victor opened his mouth, clearly ready to respond with another joke or sharp remark. But Daniel spoke again before he could. But honestly, Daniel said with a small smile, I'm grateful tonight happened. Victor frowned. Grateful. He repeated. Daniel nodded calmly. Double quotes, yes. Several people at the table looked confused. Daniel leaned back slightly in his chair. His posture relaxed. I'm grateful because moments like this show you something important. He said. Victor crossed his arms. And what exactly is that? He asked. Daniel looked around the table slowly, meeting the eyes of several people sitting there. They show you who people really are. He said that the room felt even quieter now. A waiter passed by and gently placed another plate on the table. But nobody reached for it. Victor let out a short laugh, though it sounded less confident than before. Oh, please, he muttered. You're turning a joke into a life lesson. Daniel didn't respond immediately. Instead, he turned his attention toward Emily. The change in his focus surprised everyone. Emily, he said gently. Her name sounded soft but serious. Emily looked at him. Quickly, there was something different in Daniel's eyes now. Not anger, not embarrassment, but something deeper. Yeah, she asked quietly. Daniel smiled at her. You're one of the most hard-working people I know, he said. Emily's eyes widened slightly. You chase your goals with so much determination, he continued. You stay up late working on ideas, fixing problems, making sure everything is perfect. Emily felt her chest tighten slightly. Hearing him describe her like that in front of her, coworkers felt strangely emotional. And that's one of the reasons I fell for you, Daniel added. Several people at the table glanced between them, sensing that the conversation had shifted into something more personal. Victor looked annoyed now. The attention had completely moved away from him, Daniel continued, calmly. But tonight taught me something, he said. Emily's heart beat faster. She wasn't sure what he was about to say when someone mocks the person you love. Daniel said slowly, you shouldn't feel unsure about defending them. Emily looked down. His voice wasn't angry. He wasn't blaming her. But the meaning of his words was clear. Daniel wasn't trying to embarrass her in front of everyone. He was simply speaking honestly. Victor shifted in his seat, uncomfortable with the direction the conversation had taken. Daniel looked back at the table again. I don't need people to admire me, he said quietly. That's never been important to me. He paused briefly. But I do hope the person beside me respects me. Sentence landed softly but deeply. No one moved. The entire table felt the emotional weight of the moment. Emily's eyes slowly lifted again. For the first time that night, she truly saw Daniel not just as the calm, quiet boyfriend who supported her from the background, but as a man who carried dignity and self-respect without raising his voice. Victor looked away toward his drink. The power in the room had shifted completely, and everyone at the table knew it. The weight of Daniel's words still lingered in the room as the soft music played in the background and the low chatter of other tables drifted faintly through the air. The long dinner table, once full of easy laughter and casual teasing, was now quiet. Emily's coworkers sat silently, their expressions a mixture of surprise, curiosity, and quiet admiration. Even Victor, who had tried so hard to dominate the conversation, now seemed subdued. Daniel had shifted the energy of the room not through anger or shouting, but through calm honesty and gentle strength. Daniel sat back slightly, his hands resting lightly on the table. He looked around at the faces surrounding him, observing their reactions with quiet awareness. Some were trying not to smile, some were fidgeting uncomfortably, and a few exchanged glances as if acknowledging the truth in his words. Sarah from the design department gave a slight nod, her eyes reflecting appreciation. Lucas shifted in his chair, suddenly thoughtful. It was clear to Daniel that his calm, steady voice had made people rethink how they perceived him and, perhaps even how they perceived themselves. Victor, still holding his glass, finally spoke, though his voice was quieter, lacking its previous sharpness. "Well," he said slowly, "I suppose that's one way to look at it." His tone suggested a begrudging acknowledgement rather than agreement. He wasn't used to someone responding to his teasing with such poise. Most people would have flinched, argued, or tried to fight back. Daniel, however, had simply remained calm, and that had shifted the dynamic completely. Emily watched Daniel closely. She felt a mixture of relief and admiration. Relief that he hadn't reacted angrily, admiration that he had handled the situation with such maturity. For months she had known Daniel as thoughtful, kind, and patient. But seeing him navigate a room of strangers, including a particularly challenging coworker, had revealed a new layer of his character. Her heart felt full as she realized how much she had underestimated the quiet strength he carried. Daniel turned his gaze back to Emily, and in that moment the noise of the room seemed to fade. He wasn't speaking to Victor or to the others now. His words were for her. "Emily," he said softly, his voice carrying warmth and sincerity, "you've worked so hard for everything you've achieved. Your dedication, your passion, your belief in what you do. It's remarkable. I see it every day and I admire you for it." Emily's eyes widened slightly, a flush rising to her cheeks. She hadn't expected such a personal acknowledgement in front of everyone. Her voice caught slightly as she whispered, "Daniel." She looked down for a moment, unsure of how to respond, feeling suddenly vulnerable but also deeply moved. Daniel smiled gently, his eyes never leaving hers. "I don't say this to compete or to impress anyone," he continued, his tone calm but firm. "I say it because I mean it. And tonight, when someone tries to mock me or put me down, I realize even more how much I respect the people beside me and how much I value honesty and kindness in every relationship." The table remained silent, but the atmosphere had changed completely. The previous tension, the teasing, and the awkward laughter were replaced with a quiet respect. Even Victor shifted uneasily, no longer able to dominate the room. Daniel's calm demeanor, combined with the emotional weight of his words, had turned the situation entirely in his favor, not through confrontation, but through sincerity. Emily reached for his hand under the table. The touch was subtle, yet it carried warmth and reassurance. Daniel noticed it and gave her hand a gentle squeeze, a silent acknowledgement of their connection. The gesture spoke volumes without a word. It told Emily that he was beside her, that he respected her, and that he valued their bond above all else. Daniel leaned back slightly, his voice still soft. "I'm not angry," he said, glancing around at the table. "I'm not here to make anyone feel small. But I do want to make one thing clear. Respect matters. Kindness matters. How we treat people, especially those we care about, says more than any joke or insult ever could." Victor didn't respond. His smirk was gone, replaced with a subtle tension. It was obvious that Daniel's calm but firm words had unsettled him. He had expected a confrontation, a defensive argument, or perhaps even embarrassment from Daniel. But instead, he faced quiet dignity. And it was impossible to mock that. Emily's eyes were glossy now. She hadn't realized how much she had taken Daniel's quiet presence for granted. She had always known him as gentle and kind. But seeing him command respect without aggression revealed a depth of character she had never fully appreciated. Her heart beat faster, a mix of pride, admiration, and a sense of emotional intimacy that deepened in that moment. Daniel's gaze lingered on her. "Emily," he said gently, "sometimes the strongest response isn't loud. It's calm, it's honest, and it comes from respect and love. That's what changes hearts, not anger or revenge." The table stayed quiet, the coworkers now aware that they had witnessed something meaningful, almost intimate, unfold before them. Even the waiter, who passed by with a plate of dessert, seemed to move quietly, respecting the moment. Emily's voice broke the silence softly. "I'm sorry," she said, her words barely above a whisper. "I should have said something earlier." Daniel shook his head gently. "It's okay," he replied. "You didn't need to. Sometimes just being present is enough. Tonight isn't about blame. It's about understanding." Emily took a deep breath, her eyes never leaving his. "Are you upset?" she asked, her voice filled with a mixture of concern and curiosity. "No," Daniel said, a soft smile playing on his lips. "Not angry, just a little sad, maybe. Sad that people don't always see the value in kindness and respect. But that's okay. It's a lesson for all of us." The sincerity in his voice, the gentle confidence he carried, made Emily's chest tighten. She realized that she had underestimated the quiet power of calm honesty. She had thought strength came from speaking loudly or commanding attention. But Daniel had shown her a different kind of strength, one that drew people in without force, that inspired respect without confrontation, and that created connection without drama. As the night wore on, the dinner concluded quietly. Plates were cleared, wine glasses emptied, and the restaurant began to empty slowly. Emily and Daniel stood together, ready to leave. The cool night air greeted them as they stepped outside. The gentle breeze contrasted with the warmth inside. And Emily felt a sense of clarity. She turned to Daniel, her voice soft and full of emotion. "Thank you," she said. "Not just for tonight, but for showing me everything. How strong you are. How calm. How kind. How—" Daniel looked at her, his eyes warm and steady. "I'm always going to be me," he said quietly, "and I'm always going to respect you. That's what matters most." Emily felt her hand find his again. They walked together through the quiet streets, side by side. She realized in that moment that the night wasn't just about the awkward dinner, Victor's teasing, or the coworkers' laughter. It was about trust, understanding, and the depth of connection they shared. They reached a small park near her apartment. The streetlights cast soft golden circles on the pavement. Emily squeezed Daniel's hand gently. "Can we start over?" she asked softly. "From this moment?" Daniel smiled. "We never really started the wrong way," he said. "But yes, from now, let's start together with honesty and respect." The night felt serene, almost magical. Emily realized something important. Real strength didn't come from revenge, loud words, or winning arguments. Real strength came from dignity.com, confidence, and the courage to stay true to oneself as they continued walking. Daniel glanced at Emily, a quiet smile touching his lips. She returned the smile, feeling the warmth of his hand in hers. They didn't need to speak. The night itself seemed to affirm the bond between them. The silence was comfortable, filled with understanding and shared emotion. Victor's words, the laughter of the coworkers, and the awkward dinner were now distant echoes. What remained was honesty, mutual respect, and the gentle realization that love and admiration could be quiet yet powerful. Emily knew deep in her heart that she had found someone extraordinary, not someone who dominated rooms or demanded attention, but someone whose strength came from calm conviction and genuine care. The night ended with them standing near her apartment door. Emily leaned slightly against Daniel, feeling safe and seen. "Thank you," she whispered again, "for tonight, for being you." Daniel's hand brushed gently against hers. "Always," he said. "I'll always be me, and I'll always respect you. That's enough for me." As Emily watched him walk away, she felt a quiet certainty in her heart. This man, this calm/steady presence, had shown her something she would never forget. Sometimes the strongest words were the ones spoken softly with honesty and love. Sometimes the most profound strength was in restraint, in dignity, and in the courage to be kind when it mattered most. The city lights glimmered in the distance as Emily stood there for a moment, reflecting on the evening. The dinner, the mocking words, the awkward laughter, all of it had faded into the background. What remained was clarity, respect, and an emotional connection that had deepened beyond words. She realized that true love was not always dramatic or loud. Sometimes it was quiet, steady, and powerful in its subtlety.